And thank you for joining us on day 2 of the Big Ten Summer Liaison mini conference, which we called our new normal. Before we begin, just as we did yesterday, we need to take care of some of the housekeeping. First of all, this program will be recorded. We also ask that presenters send us their slide presentations. We're doing this since we know there is an interest in this program. We had about 120 people registering for yesterday's session, with about 100 people in attendance at various times of the talks. Not all at once, but people were coming in and out, basically. Both the recording and slides will be added to the Big Ten Liaison Institute website, which is currently with the University of Maryland. However, we are working on a major rebuild of our website. And it might take us a bit of time to make all this information public, and we apologize for that in advance. I still have to reconfigure the new website to make sure that this stuff gets into it. So Judy, if you could please start recording.
Yeah, we're recording now.
Okay, thank you. For those who are joining us for the first time, I would like to introduce members of the committee. Elsa Alvaro from Northwestern. And Elsa, if you can wave or say something.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Rachel Minkin from Michigan State.
Hi, everyone.
And I'm from Maryland. Elsa and I will be introducing our speakers today. I would also like to introduce Lindsay Carpenter, Research Education Program Lead, Librarian here at Maryland, who will be helping us run this program. And also Judy Kidd from the Dean's Office, who is recording it and helping with the technical issues. We're hoping to end today's sessions around 4:15 or so, maybe a little bit earlier. Each speaker will have up to 15 minutes total, with up to 10 minutes of presentation and up to 5 minutes of Q&As. The speakers will go in the order of the program. If there is time at the end, we will be able to engage in more conversation. And I want to thank you so very much for taking time of your busy schedules to join us today, especially just before the holiday. And I want to thank all of our speakers for volunteering to share their experiences. In the course of yesterday and today's afternoon, we are featuring lightning talks from our colleagues from the Big Ten Liaison community. Yesterday's presentation were excellent, and I believe that today's presentation will be equally as good. We hope that this mini conference will provide a nuanced exploration of the way COVID-19 has disrupted, challenged, and changed our community and practice. Some of the topics include conversations about returning to campus, what did COVID taught us, what will stay, managing new workloads and services, advocacy for diversity, equity, and inclusion, impact on collections, and innovative practices. We hope that through sharing our experiences, we learn from each other and incorporate best practices into our own professional practice, thus advancing our profession. And now, without further ado, I'm giving the mic to Elsa Alvaro to start the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Yelena, and definitely heartfelt thanks to you for leading our team. So our first speaker this afternoon is Emily Dinert. Emily comes to us from the University of Maryland, where she's Humanities and Social Sciences Librarian. Emily's talk is entitled I Prefer Print Books, Talking to Humanities Faculty about electronic resources after COVID-19. Emily, whenever you're ready.
Excellent, thank you. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. All right. So as Elsa said, my name is Emily Dinert, and I am the new librarian for English language and literature, linguistics, and psychology at UMD. While this Liaison Institute is obviously for all subject areas, my talk today is focusing specifically on humanities faculty and how to talk to them about electronic and open access resources. But I hope that everyone will be able to take something away from my presentation today. So the impetus for my presentation revolves around an interaction I had with a humanities faculty at UMD shortly after my arrival. I first arrived at UMD in January of this year. And at that time, COVID-19 was raging through the state of Maryland, and campus was trying to shut down as much as possible to slow the transmission prior to the start of the spring 2022 semester, which had many in-person classes scheduled and a plethora of students returning to campus. UMD was not the only university trying to ensure it could continue in-person classes for the spring 2022 semester and move past the COVID-19 pandemic. And it seemed that the general consensus around the nation was to get back to normal as quickly as possible. This is the backdrop of the interaction that I had with that humanities faculty member that made me pause. Specifically, this faculty member reached out to me about purchasing a book for the library's collection, and they asked for the format to be in print because, quote, "I prefer print books." I also prefer print books for reading, so I don't mean to demonize this preference, but this comment stuck with me as I ruminated on my new position at UMD and my experiences as an academic librarian throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. At my previous institution, I managed reference services, which meant I was on the front line of providing access to our resources during remote learning. I'm sure that many of you can relate to the experiences I had regarding accessibility of resources during lockdowns and quarantines. There were many times that I discovered we owned a print resource, but did not have it electronically, making it difficult or impossible for students to access resources in a timely manner as we rapidly transitioned to that remote learning.
Emily, I'm so sorry. Are your slides supposed to advance?
Not yet.
Okay.
This is just like background stuff. Thanks, Elena. I don't have a whole lot of slides. It's mostly just a story for you guys. So during this time, I also got to know a few students who were blind, and during our campus closures were not within the state. I helped them with several research projects throughout the spring 2020 semester and the 2020-2021 academic year. As you may imagine, we regularly ran into obstacles and became frustrated. The most common obstacle we ran into was the inability to find electronic versions of books relevant to their research interests. The library I was working at often had print books that were of interest to the students, but that did not make them accessible. Even though our campus had an accessibility office, during the pandemic, there were many barriers to using the office's services, such as the fact that workers were remote and not in the office, making it more difficult for a student to get in touch with the employees. Additionally, wait times for accessibility conversions were incredibly long, sometimes even longer than the timeline students had to complete their assignments. And of course, because the COVID-19 pandemic, students were unable to travel to the library and pick up physical books to scan for themselves. These barriers made it basically impossible for students who are blind to use physical books for their classes. Sadly and frustratingly, these obstacles were not new for these students, but they were exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Anecdotal information and opinions I heard from these students match up perfectly with data collected from a blind academic library users experiences study by Adina Mulliken and Carrie Falloon. Mulliken and Falloon conducted a qualitative survey with 18 academic library users who were blind to understand their difficulties in using library resources. One of the prominent themes that emerged was that, quote, students said the difficulty of obtaining accessible versions of print books discouraged or prevented them from using print books. Other students did use print books, but reported a sometimes complex and time-consuming process for having them made accessible. Yet other times, students did not believe they needed print books. Particularly illuminating was one of the questions from the survey, which said, quote, if you were doing your library research and if you found the citation for a book that seemed like it was really good for your topic, but it was a print book, and then you found an accessible ebook that was on a sort of similar topic, but not the exact, not quite as good, do you think you would go for the accessible one, or would you try to get the print one? In the interviewee responded, probably the accessible one. Considering the experiences I had with these blind students, I can't help but admit that the humanities professor's request for a print book did not sit well with me. Literature prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, such as Candace Dahl's 2013 study, suggests that humanities faculty were slowly changing their perception of electronic resources. But even after the difficulties many faced in accessing information and class materials during COVID-19, recent research from Britsaida Reyes and Francis Devlin's 2021 survey has shown that, quote, print books are viewed as superior sources in the humanities compared to ebooks. While there are many benefits to print books, I think the time is right to discuss the idea that, quote, the provision of electronic information resources and services in this modern period has much significance to effective learning, teaching, and research with our humanities faculty. And it's time to consider that the normal and pre-COVID practices or habits we are desperately trying to return to were never good or accessible for many students in the first place. How then do we approach faculty members in humanities departments and encourage them to consider ebooks and eventually open educational resources or open access content? I believe we can start, as I did, with the issue of accessibility for their students. I, am using library users who are blind as only one example of people who need electronic books instead of physical books, but there are many others whose abilities would also benefit from ebook versions of academic books. A few examples that come to mind are those who are dyslexic or those who have ADHD. Ebooks allow them to use screen readers or to change the font and color to better assist their reading. We can also not ignore how the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed the many roles students have beyond being a college student. They may be parents, primary caregivers, or primary income earners. Ebooks could be of more use to students with these other responsibilities in a variety of ways. They could listen to a book on a commute, or an ebook may be more convenient to read on their phones in a doctor's office, etc. To further emphasize how ebooks may provide a more equitable and accessible format for most college students, a 2021 survey from Wilson, Hooper, Simpson, and Slay found that when conducting research or doing schoolwork, 41% of respondents preferred to use ebooks and 28% had no preference on format. Together, that's 69% of respondents who prefer or do not mind ebooks, or over 2/3 of the students. And this statistical spread was true across all disciplines. Since library collections are necessarily built with a range of users in mind, it may be useful to remind faculty of the breadth of accessibility ebooks can provide when we consider which materials to add to our collections. And so that's what this chart is showing you. I also want to acknowledge, however, that faculty are regular and important users of our collections, and thus their needs should be taken into consideration when building our collections as well. As I mentioned earlier, many humanities faculty may feel that ebooks are counterintuitive to their research methods and knowledge creation. However, Dahl's 2013 article states that while, quote, traditional representations of the research habits of humanists would suggest that ebooks are largely unsuitable for their needs, more current investigations into their practices suggest that this is not completely the case. Humanists' growing acceptance of electronic resources, significant reliance on the monographic form, heavy use of library catalogs, and the increasingly interdisciplinary nature of their work means that ebooks can play an important role. Another more recent study from Xishuan Chen found that humanities scholars used electronic resources during the research stages of idea generation, document search and collection, and interpretation and writing. In other words, at every point of their research process. And finally, a 2018 study about humanities scholars' feelings about ebooks versus print books found that nearly 1/3 felt that ebooks and printed books are equally important to their disciplines. And that's what this chart is from that study. And this supports Chen's study that humanities scholars are using electronic resources throughout their research. While 1/3 is certainly not the majority of humanities scholars, it's also not an insignificant amount of them. And I believe that this, coupled with Chen's study, can serve as a starting point for discussions with humanities scholars about the ways in which ebooks could be of vital use to them. So to wrap up, here are my sources. And I just want to say that ultimately the language we use to speak with faculty about ebooks and open educational resources and open access materials is the language we've been using to talk about the issues for some time. But the COVID-19 pandemic has put these accessibility needs in stark relief. pairing accessibility conversations with a compassionate understanding of the individual needs of humanities scholars and the ways in which ebooks can help them specifically can help us build collections that are truly inclusive. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Emily. Any questions for Emily? Kathleen, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello, thank you for that presentation. Of the list of references there, which one is the one that was about the study where they were talking about the different stages of their research?
That was Chen's study. Let me go back one, and that was exploring the use of electronic resources by humanities scholars during the research process.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And once Emily also gives us her slides and we're able to make them public, we can also look deeply into the sources and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have time for one more question for Emily. It was really a fascinating talk.
Thank you.
So the chats just gives you a lot of thanks.
That works for me. Thank you so much, everyone. So what happened? Oh, so that's a great question. I got this. The short answer is I ordered an ebook. This is a learning process for me. I put it in my cart to like go talk to that person, and I realized I'd actually just ordered it instead of doing that. But next time around, I will talk to them beforehand. But then the professor was actually very understanding when I said, you know, I understand why you want that, but if you want this to be used by more than just yourself, we need to be thinking of the wider audience. And he was really understanding. So great question. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you. Do you think that will translate well to other departments that you work with?
I believe so, but of course the other departments I work with are linguistics and psychology, and there's the social sciences, and they're pretty much already on the ebook train.
So you started with a tougher case.
Yeah, so I kind of had the toughest case there.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Emily, for the work. Moving on, our next speaker is Nevenka Zadravtkowska. Nevenka is the head of the STEM library at the University of Maryland. And the title of her talk is New Realities from Adjusting to Leading Change.
Thanks, Yelena, Elsa, and Rachel for putting this conference together. Let me start sharing my screen. Yes. And hope you can see my slides. So
thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to talk, this is of course a lightning talk, so it's not going to be very extensive, but I will talk about some priorities that the campus and the libraries have currently. Some are due to the pandemic, others are just according to the new realities. And the two priorities that I'm going to talk about are the increased emphasis and making improvements in all levels in diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, and also supporting open science and scholarship. So the diversity and inclusion access has been part of the campus for many years. And there is a website that has extensive information about it. There is also President's Commission on Disability Issues that has been also in existence for many years. And as a matter of fact, one of our colleagues from the STEM library has been a member of that commission. And starting this year, she's one of the co-chairs. So shout out to Nedalina Changalova. But what's new is that the Senate recently passed a resolution that, and it was in May 2022, for the undergraduate students who complete their general education requirements. And this puts a lot of new level of information to the for the new undergraduate students. And that is something that we all applaud that is happening. So we really like this push. What is, I also want to mention the publishers' initiatives, and they are plenty. I'm just mentioning here Curated and Elsevier, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the publishers are not doing anything. What Curated, and they have a report that the link is on the on this slide, and recently there was a webinar. They only looked at the publications in the United that have been authored by authors from the United States for the 10-year period. What they discovered was that there is a very steady, there is no difference in the ethnicity of the people, of the authors that have published from 2010 to 2020, except for computer science. They looked only in 4 subject areas that were in the STEM disciplines, but the only one that had some major shift in those 10 years was computer science, and the big shift happened in the Asian and Pacific Islanders versus the white only people. What they explain why they were using only the United States, because they were using census data to identify the people, the authors, by their last name, because the census has identified what is the likelihood for a person, for example, that his last name is Miller, to be white versus any other ethnicity. So it was a conscious decision to look only in the United States. But they are very, very open to expand this, because this was just a test. They are very open to expand to other areas, and also to look at the authorship of each individual institution. This is not to say that they are changing anything, it's just making aware people in institutions and in the fields what are the authors of their publications. Elsevier had a different approach, and the webinar that I attended in April, they were looking at the gender equality, and they were using a Scopus data, and it was worldwide. And it was also a very, very interesting webinar with different takes on this issue. It was not only interesting, what I found problematic, for example, for them, gender was only male, female, but along the way of the presentation, they said that they are actually working on expanding the transgender and all other reportings of gender identities. And also something that this global strategic network is working on collecting, on trying to come up with a form for authors to identify, instead of trying to guess what their gender is, what their ethnicity is, for self-reporting of who you consider you are. I personally think it's a wonderful idea, but if they are asking me when I'm author, I'm reluctant to give my information. So I don't know how far that will go. That's just my take on it. So the STEM solutions that I wanted to mention is that with the examples of Curated and Elsevier, the gap is most pronounced in the STEM fields. It's heavily white male, as we know. But the libraries have not been sitting on, they've been aware of this and doing things. What I like about what is happening is that departments, especially the STEM departments, when they need a workshop or something to understand what is happening with the publishing in the STEM fields, they contact us. So they look up to the libraries to get answers to some of their questions. And one of those examples, it was a request from a faculty from the engineering department that was asking for a workshop on finding diverse voices in academic research. And yesterday, my colleague Jody Coulter had a wonderful presentation about her work on customizing workshops for different audiences for graduate, undergraduate students, and also from different departments. So I'm not gonna repeat what Jody Coulter said because she did a wonderful job. So as much as I'm happy that STEM departments are approaching us, I'm also concerned about the staffing issues because we have, I don't want to say problem, but it is a concern. Let's put it that way. And that is my second priority that we are experiencing is emphasis, big emphasis, increased emphasis on open science and scholarship, something that the libraries have been pushing for many, many years, but now suddenly part because of the pandemic, as Emily mentioned, but also because suddenly people's attitude change. And I'm very happy that the Senate approved on April 6th, one of the initiatives that was spearheaded by the libraries and the UMD Pact committee that is a campus-wide working group sponsored by the University Library Council, the Office of the Provost, and the Division of Research. So they passed the equitable access to scholarly articles authored by university faculty. And there is a link to both UMD Pact and the resolution that was passed. So also in the libraries, more specifically, this was more campus-wide initiative, but also in the libraries, one of the libraries initiative for 2023 is the Scholars Brain Trust, and to create a working group. And this is a quote, and I don't know, I was looking, Yelena, about do we have the Scholar Brain Trust document somewhere? I couldn't find it. Maybe we should make it available. That's a plea from me.
I think we're working on it.
Yes, yeah,
you need to start wrapping up, sorry to interrupt.
Yes, yeah. So what we are doing specifically in the STEM library, we had a lot of vacancies in recently. We are just a 6 people operation, liaisons. We lost within the 18 months, including next month, 4 people. So that's a pretty big turnout. We had a recent search and we included open science in the title. So STEM and open science librarian. We successfully filled those positions, and the new people will start soon. And we will advertise the next position that will be vacant next month soon, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for our speaker?
So I don't see anything in chat.
I do have one question. Could you talk a bit about the Scholars Brain Trust?
Yes, the Scholars Brain Trust is
As a
actually—
preview to the documentation that you are so kindly going to share.
Yes, and Yelena can talk a little bit more, but I think it's a big document to begin with, and it has a lot of components, and the open scholarship is just one portion of it.
So Scholars Trust is offensive wording for trying to figure out a way to communicate with particular faculty on campus that goes both ways, not just the libraries going to the faculty, but also having return from, having the information has to flow both ways and not just one way into the library, what faculty wants from us. So it's building partnerships. It's kind of improving library's image on campus, improving our footprint on campus as well, making the libraries more of an intellectual hub. So it's a lot of it is communication campaign, but there are a lot of different moving parts who participate in it. It's a lot of it is liaison librarians, but it's more than liaison librarians. It's also libraries administration, libraries communication plan, and other things. So as we reconfiguring website, we're also trying to reconfigure where that should go. At some point, we will share those documents publicly. I hope I answered the questions.
Yes, you did. Thank you. Thank you. We have time for a quick question for Nevenka. Thank you. Seeing none. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really interesting as a science librarian myself. Our next speaker is Autumn Wetley. Autumn is the undergraduate collections librarian at the University of Michigan. And the title of the talk is Service Design and Collections, Reimagining Undergraduate Collections at the University of Michigan Library. When you're ready.
Great. Hi, thank you. Yes, I am Autumn Wetley, and I'm undergraduate collections librarian. So I don't liaison with a specific subject area, but focus on working with undergrads and providing materials for them. My colleague Jennifer is actually going to be co-presenting with me, and she's going to start off the presentation. Jennifer, if you want to introduce yourself, I'll share my screen and I'll go through the slides.
Sounds great, Autumn. Our presentation is on a project, really. It's called Service Design and Collections, Reimagining Undergraduate Collections at the University of Michigan. So first, what do I mean by the undergraduate library collections? All our students can use any material in the entire library. Basically, in August of 2020, the Library convened a group to examine the undergraduate library collections. These are housed in what is now called Shapiro Library. The undergraduate library is the original name of the library. It opened in 1958 to focus on the needs of students in the first 2 years of study. So rather than having a liaison department, as Adam said, this is our constituency, is the undergraduates of the first 2 years. This collection has evolved a lot over the years. It's grown, it's shrunk. It's now largely electronic, but also has print materials as well. The focus is on curriculum-based materials and also introductory texts like handbooks. And we have some mini collections like a college and career success collection, travel books, and some materials for popular culture, for entertainment and well-being. We have a large browsing area for fiction and graphic novels, current magazines, and things like that. Now, we've had several assessments over the years of the collection, but now we have new pressures. We have an intense need for more study space and less stack areas. This increased demand for electronic materials, especially during the COVID period when we were closed like everyone else, but even before that, of course. And the undergraduates are simply changing. A lot of them do research right from their first year. So basically, we want our collections to reflect our entire population, very diverse populations. We want collections to be timely and relevant, but the needs keep changing. So how can we stay relevant? And how do we know what students even want from a library at this stage? Next slide, please. So this project addressed this design question. How could we make our undergraduate collections a community-driven service? Our task was to explore these changing needs of undergraduate students with an emphasis on participatory design and inclusion to build responsive collection development practices that can change constantly over time, along with our students and their needs. This is a service design project in which we worked with actual undergraduate students and librarians, involving them in the project from the beginning. So what is service design? That's a model in which there is no clear distinction between goods and services. The library collection is just one of many services provided by the library. It's in this model, library patrons, which are the undergraduates in this case, and the librarians work together to create a relevant collection. It takes a holistic approach to the library experience, includes both the physical and the digital environment, and it's a user-centered process to meet the students' needs and expectations. Next slide, please. This is our service design team. It was composed of 4 librarians, 4 undergraduate students, and a facilitator, who is one of our library managers. It took place over a year and a half. It consisted of 21 workshops, 15 interviews, and 2 focus groups. So it was an extensive project. Our 4 students who worked on this project on the right there were in fact upper undergraduates, which was a benefit because they could remember the physical space and remember how it felt to use the library when they first came to the university, and they were paid for their time. Next slide, please. So throughout this process, there were several stages in these. These are the 4 broad stages. In the research phase, students and librarians used methods such as journey maps, personas, and discussions to develop service design goals and move those into research questions. The research questions were then used to formulate interview questions. And then throughout the process, ideas were collected on a research wall using Mural software. And then in the later stages, all the ideas were organized and focused and were selected into certain ideas that became prototypes and then pilot projects. So that's the implementation stage. Next slide. Our 4 students conducted 15 interviews with with other undergraduates who were from racially diverse first and second year students across all majors, or a wide variety of majors and disciplines. And with the results, we used affinity mapping to group together ideas into themes, and then discussed those and came up with various insights. So although dozens of ideas were generated, we ended up with a few core insights that you see here. And in addition to these 4 kind of areas, main areas, I should say that the students especially emphasized that e-textbooks and curricular materials are needed more now than ever, but in an electronic format. So Autumn, over to you.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to try and zip through this. So, after doing the research, developing these personas of these sort of different types of students and, telling stories about them, thinking about like the issues they might have, we did some everybody did some ideating, brainstorming solutions that collections could possibly bring to some of these persona problems and issues that they were having. So here is just 2 examples. On the left is a student one. There was a lot of ideas about technology and integrating technology into the space to help with discovery. Also, as I'm sure you all know, students do not see the library as separate, different pieces. It's sort of just like everything is, I don't think they don't understand like exactly how it's set up. And so then the right is a sketch of like a small mini collection, it'd be highly visible, not like the stacks necessarily, much more browsable, which we do have some of that, but the idea is to have more of those. Like sharing my screen too. Okay. So after we came up with all these different ideas, we needed to prioritize what was going to be possible. And so we kind of thought about what could have high impact, but would also be easy to implement. These were the 4 ideas we came up with. And then the 2 highlighted one, the mini collections and the social media engagement. So a couple of our students from that service design team wanted to work with us over the summer of 2021, and they wanted to work specifically on these 2 ideas. So these are the 2 we focused on. So over the summer, those students worked on these. They developed prototypes, which was difficult because we were not physically in the space. So, the one on the left was from a slideshow that was supposed to be about a mini collection. It was more about the content of the books. The right was Instagram mock-up post, and we had the students test these with 2 different focus groups of undergrads to get their feedback on what they thought about all this. Go back. Okay, so after getting that prototyping stuff wrapped up in the fall, this past winter I started piloting some different ideas. There have been 2 student curated collections in the Shapiro lobby. On the right is a photo of one of these. I worked with 2 different student groups that are employees of the students, peer information consultants, and the student ambassadors. Going to continue to do that this summer. They pick the topic. I'm kind of just there to help them. They create the signs, and then I kind of just like put the pieces in place. I'm also working with a couple undergrad student employees this summer. We're going to try creating some digital collections for you can see kind of in the background of that photo, that screen, highlighting some of our like ebooks and audiobooks through Overdrive with like QR codes and stuff. And we're going to develop social media materials and content that we can kind of just like roll out in the fall. And I'm going to touch base with different campus social media accounts and things to see how we can get involved with that. And also the students help me like purchase materials. So they give me give me lists of suggestions, and then I kind of check to make sure we don't already have it, and if we want it in a different format and that kind of thing. That's mostly for like leisure reading and fun and that kind of material right now. They're also doing some like blog writing and different things like that. It's really, really fun to work with them, but it's all supposed to be like the content is really student driven. And I'm kind of just there to help facilitate and make things happen. Challenges. All right. COVID-19 really disrupted the timeline. We were not physically in the space. It kind of changed the way this project was originally going to happen, which also, totally changed our timeline. Everything kind of got pushed back. Like I said, scale. There was a lot of interest in technology integration, but we just couldn't, that was not going to be something that we could easily implement, especially during a time of funding freezes and budget freezes. Student collaboration, this is supposed to be really student-driven work, and it's hard. Like, the students are going through a lot. They're really busy. They have a ton of things going on. So it's kind of like that tension of trying to get them involved, but I also don't want to burden them, right? And also change. We are getting a new dean. My boss is leaving, administration at the university is kind of up in the air. And we're also, the library is working on strategic collection initiatives. So there's just a ton of change happening. And so my philosophy is to just go with the flow. And, I love working with the students, and this is just like this little experiment, this way to get them involved. And, maybe this can build out in the future when things are a little more stable.
Okay,
I was just going to say last, thank you. Also, feel free to contact us. I've worked on service design before. I love it. I love user research, and I love promoting that in library work. So please reach out if you have any questions or want to talk about this further. Thank you.
Thank you. Really exciting talk. We have time for one question? Perhaps two, if we.
There was some interest about Nielsen Norman Group, and there was an explanation what it was in the chat. So thank you.
I can confirm that the idea of service design is from the business world, and it's very similar to participatory design. But it has been used before in libraries, and we used it a library adapted version of it.
How do you use it? Sorry.
Go ahead, Elsa.
No, I was going to say, if you had used it before in your library.
Yes,
Autumn,
yes, we have. There's been, I worked on a project regarding booking consultation appointments. We've used parts of it with consultation space testing, which was pre-COVID. I know they have been working on it lately with like on-site research services. So my supervisor actually is trained in service design, and so she facilitates that kind of work.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Well, it also seems that everybody in the same boat with so many changes with administration and other things. So
that makes me feel better.
Some warm wishes there from folks.
Anything unexpected that you learned from the process, or anything that surprised you, or not really?
Not too much, but I was surprised. The students really did expect the undergraduate collection to cover all different types of topic areas. I didn't think that they would still think that mattered necessarily, but they really wanted like introductory texts on, every major or every sort of school that, U of M touches on. And I personally was not expecting that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And good luck to everyone with the change that seems to be everywhere. So moving on, our next speaker is Selena McDonald, U.S. Government Documents, Law, Criminology, and Criminal Justice Librarian at the University of Maryland. Selena's talk is entitled Student Labor Working with Documents During the COVID-19 Pandemic. Selena, when you're ready.
Okay, cool, thank you. And I set my timer just so I keep on task.
Thank you. Apologies to all the speakers who have receiving my timing reminders.
So, slideshow, there we go. So welcome everybody. Thank you for letting me be here today. I'm going to speak real quickly about what it was like working with students during the COVID-19 pandemic. As mentioned before, I am the U.S. Government Documents Librarian, at Maryland. We are the regional federal depository library for Maryland, Delaware, and DC. I work with 52 libraries. And when the pandemic started, I had 2 students plus me. And there was 1 staff member who was processing the documents. So as you can imagine, the pandemic really kind of made everything go into upheaval. So here's kind of an agenda for today. I'm going to talk about our team a little bit more, kind of what happened, how it played out, what lessons I learned, and next steps. I want to make it very clear that this is an ongoing process. It's mostly coming from things I observed while working with people during the pandemic. And I wanted to put this picture here because it made me smile. My team is very diverse. We come from all sorts of backgrounds. And I saw this picture and it really made me think about us and how we do like to talk and chat, but we are very socially distanced, meeting virtually and whatnot. So kind of, here's our team at the beginning. There were 3 of us. There was me, 2 students and a staff member. When shutdown came, I lost 1 student immediately because she was mostly because she was a new hire and she was going out of town and it was during the training period. So she just kind of said, I'll check in with you when we're back to campus. Luckily, I was able to keep the other student. I had this student for quite a while. And actually, this is where the thought of this whole program began. When I got her, her name was Jakira Webb. I promised her I was going to give her a shout out. She came to me, I kind of was sharing custody of her with another department. And I realized through her just how important all that cross training is. So there was the 2 of us, and then we had a staff member who was processing the documents. When the pandemic started, we already had a backlog. I just realized how big it was. So we knew going into it that one of the main things we were going to need to do is train Jakira up big time. She was familiar with this employee's work. And honestly, she was our best lead. So when we transitioned to offsite, we had laptops and I started having her work on things that normally I would not assign to a student. Normally students are getting shelving, they're helping me, they get a spreadsheet from me to help me with a weeding project. Sometimes I have them help me with my LibGuides, but I don't really give them very advanced things. And I certainly don't ask for them to have access to our catalog so that they can enter materials. And this is where I really started to learn what was going on. In the interim, one thing I did was I had her look at records that we knew had changed. We get notifications from the government publishing office when those happen. And I wasn't sure how much those had been being updated over the years because there had been adjustments in workflow and who could do what and when, and just kind of interruptions with life. So I had her start doing that. I wanted her to get familiar with the back side of things, like reconciling records together, as well as to identify problems that were existing. I really wanted to make sure, A, we keep the student labor going and prepare them for when we get back because they were going to get a lot more work. I should add, she stopped being a student during this time. She graduated. So I also had to transition her into a contractual position. And basically kind of what I observed through talking with her was a lot of the work I could give her is stuff that is skill building for any future career endeavors. I started really being very deliberate in how I planned her assignments. I knew that HTML skills are important to a lot of people. So I said, hey, we're going to have you help me out with this LibGuide. And I walked with her every step of the way. I also, sorry, I want to make sure I keep moving because I know I've only got 5 minutes left. I also made sure to talk with her about what are her long-term career prospects. I could see that she might be interested in libraries, but she wasn't 100% sure. So I wanted to give her office skills. So I asked her to help me coordinate a meeting. Help me set up the calendar invite and the Zoom stuff. I really wanted to make sure that I was giving her skills that not only are valuable to me in the library, but things that were going to help make her more marketable when she decided to move on to another thing. So during lockdown, that's a lot of what we did. When it came to reopening, our backlog was even bigger than when it started. GPO, the Government Publishing Office, held back all of our orders, and we are a regional federal depository. So there were pallets upon pallets, and we stayed closed longer than a lot of other places. We were closed from March to about March 2020 to about July, August 2021. So we had, I remember getting actually a lot of emails from GPOs saying, hey, can you start getting your stuff? So we came back, we had to get the space ready. There was a recarpeting project. We basically just had to hit the ground running, and it was a little bit crazy. But part of what happened with that is I ended up sharing custody again, and this time with the people that do our metadata services. And that's where I learned another lesson. We have now scheduled bi-weekly meetings with everybody else who works with government documents, including the people that supervise them with regular check-ins. Before then, we'd been very siloed, very separated. The person who did the processing was over here on the second floor. I was on the fourth floor, and it was very separated. And when we realized just how many backlog, various other problems we had accumulated by having us so separated, we very quickly resolved to just stop that. We started having our meetings. When it was time for them to clean up the second floor, I showed up there with my full like gloves and my mask and everything else with them. And just really wanted to make sure we looked at like working together, making teamwork, and also more importantly, cross-training. I found that when I gave Jakira and other students more complicated tasks to go with the shelving and whatnot, I keep them longer, and they do better work. So I've been really trying to follow that up. There, of course, has been turnover. She was a recent graduate, so Jakira has moved on. And now I have hired a new student plus somebody in that contractual position. And I am carrying those lessons along. Right now, literally the contractual person started this week. So I'm already starting them on the basic training. And next week, we're going to start meeting with the people in the other department. We are visiting spaces. And I'm really trying to think of other ways that I can help give them skills. Right now, my student, my C1 is a new graduate. I think I'm gonna be targeting new graduates for a while, who used to work in the library in another department. So I'm thinking about other ways I can cross-train people, because I really found that these people having an understanding of not only GovDocs, but of cataloging and metadata services, of the collection and stacks maintenance people, it really helped us get our projects done, even though we are a very small team. And I've said it before, but another lesson that I learned ages ago, but I just keep reiterating it and like to share it, is bribery. I have to go to people asking for favors all the time. You know, I have a small unit. Sometimes the task just calls for more bodies. So I start baking. I actually learned it from my very original mentor, who was a University of Michigan graduate. She made killer brownies and everybody would do her bidding. I make bread pudding and I can get people to help me move. So I fully advocate for bribery. So last thing is, kind of to summarize what I was saying, is I assign tasks and give training based on what the student is doing now and their future goals. And I sit down and I talk to them like, what do you want to do when you graduate? What kind of things are we doing in this office that you can take to your future career? I'm really hoping that kind of doing more in-depth, thoughtful assignment and training of these people, of our students and the employees, will really help us keep people more long-term. I found when people have a positive work environment, even if they're not getting necessarily the best pay, they will stick around for a happy place, as long as it's survivable. And then the last thing I will say is communication. Like I said it before, but communication is the one thing I've learned. Like I talk a lot, but I've learned that I need to talk more and think about what I'm talking about and make sure I'm sharing that information with people, even if it's just, hey, I'm going to be out of the office this hour. Make sure people are aware of things. And then I want to say this, may the coffee kick in before reality does. That's kind of a thing. I know we're all tired and exhausted and, you know, in a state of fluctuation. So I'm a firm believer in may the coffee kick in before reality does, and laugh in hardship, because I don't want to spend my time crying. So I may as well get the coffee and just keep going. And that concludes me. Does anybody have any questions for me? And I will be sure to share the slides with everybody. I think that's the fastest I've ever talked, and I'm fast.
And I
Saying
don't
that you were
see,
perfect
I
on
don't see
timing.
nothing in the chat.
Thank you.
I have one question.
Mhm.
I mean, I really loved how deliberate you were in developing their skills and engaging them. So does it make you want to have more students? Are you at capacity? Do you have plans?
I would love to have more right
I would
now.
want to work
kind-
with you as a student worker.
I really do try to. I actually was a University of Michigan graduate, and I learned this there. I had students that basically said that they had gotten offers for better pay, but they liked working with me because I created a positive environment. And I took that to heart. And I very, very, it's one of the biggest things I've ever, most important things I've ever learned. I'd love to have more students. Right now I'm a little bit at capacity, but as I train these new ones in, hopefully in the future, I'll be able to hire more. And student labor is really helping me keep going with a lot of my responsibilities. So they have to treat them right.
Yeah, totally. And I have to say that I love the connection between this talk and the talk before about their engagement fellows and their peer consultants and how they were integrated in their processes. So that's all fabulous.
I love to do peer training. That's one of my, when I lost people, that was the thing I lost. I was like, oh no. So now I'm in the weeds with them, but hopefully we'll be able to keep it going.
Thank you, Selena. Congratulations for being able to keep a motivated team during the pandemic.
Thank you.
So I think we're changing gears, and Elsa and I. So I will be announcing our next speaker, Jodie Coulter, Life Sciences and Outreach Librarian, University of Maryland, and she will be talking about embedded lab librarianship, finding new venues for information literacy engagement.
Thank you, Yelena. I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm also going to try and get my slides to actually work today. So hopefully, let's see here. Is everybody seeing my actual slides, first of all?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to try and do this today. So as Yelena mentioned, my name is Jodie Coulter. I am the Life Sciences and Outreach Librarian at the University of Maryland, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about embedded lab librarianship. For any STEM librarian in the room, as you are all well aware, COVID was something of a nightmare for traditional lab instruction. For undergraduates, it was obviously painful and difficult because if you're in a STEM discipline, chances are very, very good that you're going to spend at least half of your time, if not, 3/4 of your time in a lab. And for graduates, it was so important for graduation, right? Like their entire careers depend on this lab time. So when COVID happened, we sort of had this rush of instructors and faculty members who were asking the librarians, what do you have? What can you help us with? Do you have any kind of resources that are available? And right before COVID hit, I had read this article that I'm going to talk a little bit about later, where they were talking about integrated lab librarianship, and it was sort of fresh in my mind. And I was like, well, no, we don't necessarily, but let's create some, let's see what we can find. And so I sort of took it as an opportunity to expand what I was already doing in terms of information literacy. So that article I was talking about is Lab Integrated Librarians by Carol, Eskridge, and Chang. Hopefully you're all seeing the slides. I'm hoping it's changed. So let me know if you're not. But yeah, so I read this article. It was in my mind. I was like, this is amazing. And basically it's a form of embedded librarianship, but it's embedded librarianship within a lab, particularly within a research lab in the sciences. And instruction, the sort of gold standard of instruction is embedded librarianship. And that means, you are that classroom sort of personal librarian throughout the semester. Embedded lab librarianship is very, very similar, but instead of being in the classroom, you are in the lab. And this, again, is not an original idea. It's just something that I had in the back of my mind as we were going into COVID. There were different lab models that I chose, mostly based on request. So it was mostly based on what faculty members were asking of me. Probably the most prominent was, integration within the lab once or bi-weekly. So it was being in their lab for an hour weekly and talking to them or sitting back and listening to what they had to say. A very close second was once a month. So I would, again, go into their lab meetings that are, sort of a standard of many, many labs. And I would be in there once a month and I would just contribute what I could. Sometimes I was asked to present on a particular topic, but it was, this was sort of a close second in terms of requests. I also created some passive lab materials. So these are just research guides that had maybe videos on them describing a certain topic that related to libraries. And then based on those, we would create individual consultations for students who maybe need more hands-on, needed more one-on-one time, who just weren't picking up the concepts from the videos, anything like that. So that was sort of an alternative. And then for future expansion, we've actually gotten requests from the engineering library, which I'm not a liaison with, but I was working with the interim engineering librarian to create semester-long graduate school modules. So they would come in for their very first semester in the fall. They would take these modules in their lab, not in any sort of formal classroom instruction, but in their lab. And then they would sort of discuss this in their lab meetings, discuss the modules in their lab meetings, and also come to us for consultations, individual consultations. So what do we even talk about? Honestly, we're talking about like just information literacy, anything library related. It would often depend on where the student was in their research. So if they were just sort of starting out and they needed to do a literature review, we would honestly talk about a lot about search strategy and best practices. We would talk about, like the best database, the most appropriate database, and how to do a comprehensive literature review. We would often talk about research data management. This often came like after that initial literature review stage. The research data management part was interesting because originally we did have a data librarian. I did lean heavily on him. He's now at the Library of Congress, and I miss him terribly because I really appreciated his insight. But a lot of that was like how to set up a table, how to accurately correct or accurately collect data in the field, all of that type of stuff. I also would jump in occasionally and talk about other library services. So if somebody was like, I don't know where I can access 3D printer, which weirdly comes up a lot in labs, I would say, hey, I know the place. The STEM library has one. I would talk about workshops that we had, so citation workshops or GIS workshops, anything like that that we need, statistical consulting, all of that good stuff. So it was honestly just a librarian role, but like very much embedded within the lab, very much like part of the lab dynamics, which was a lot of fun. So what did this actually look like? So one of the labs that I worked intensely with was a LAMP lab. Dr. Bill Lamp, he does a lot of work with invasive pests, crop pests in particular. He also does a lot of work with water insects, honestly, like aquatic insects. This was a very sort of informal situation. This was honestly one of those alternative models. We would have an orientation for new graduates entering his lab, and then they were referred to me for consultations, and we set up a research guide that had a lot of information on it about library resources. We also talked a lot about systematic reviews. Dr. Lamp is really pushing his graduate students to start thinking about systematic reviews, what those look like in terms of entomology, which is, a really new field. There's a lot yet to be discovered and talked about. So they were coming to me for a lot of like, what is a systematic review? Is this actually what I need? All of that good stuff. we talked a lot about citation management, and we also talked about literature searches, particularly for PhD students. This particular lab has a lot of international students, and they often had difficulties accessing the literature through the library's website. So I would help them, work through the problems that they might have there, just because they maybe don't have the same system from wherever they came from. So it was definitely very sort of ad hoc, but it was still being embedded in his actual lab. For the B Lab, this one is incredibly fun. This one I'm still a part of, still like working in pretty intensively. This is 1 hour every week via Zoom, Thursday mornings, just did it at 9 o'clock this morning. We are doing an exhaustive literature search. It's very similar to a systematic review, but it is vastly bigger. I mean, it's just huge. It's from 1850 to about 1850 to 1950. And it's just big. It's looking at bee lore. What were people being told about taking care of bees in the 1850s? What was new? What was upcoming? How did they spread information about how to manage and take care of bees? It's a lot of fun. I have to learn a lot. I'm getting like a crash course in history librarianship. So I have to refer to my colleagues regularly, like, how do I do this? I don't even know how to do some of this stuff. So I have to talk to people not in STEM. And we also talk a lot to the students in his lab about, he's like referring students to me all the time about, what is a literature review and how do I do the most comprehensive literature review? So next steps, what do those even look like? Well, I would really like to increase capacity, expand my capacity. I'm only one person. I need to start thinking about how to do this like on a grander scale, and how to sort of make this adaptable across multiple labs. I would like to create more passive modules that I can embed into, more research guides and all of that good stuff. I would like to sort of change the way that I'm getting consultation requests, because right now they're just coming to me from all over the place, and I would like to sort of centralize that. And I know I'm almost at time, and I'm so sorry, I'm hurrying as fast as I can. And I would also like to incorporate more materials from, library-wide services. So I'd like to work more with like other librarians who can sort of assist. That's something that Alex Carroll and that team did. They had many, many more. And that's it. So I know that there is one question in chat here. How would you prioritize which labs? So that's a really great question. Most of the time, the labs that were coming to me were specifically from the entomology department. And I think that was because I was part of the entomology department at the time. And we didn't, so initially it was sort of assessing what the need actually was. So with the B Lab, for example, there was obviously a huge need. It was massive. It was very, very big. And for them, it was like, okay, I know that you want me to be there for an hour, but for everything else that you're doing, we need to talk about how can I create these modules, and what the timeline for those modules would look like. So that one was sort of like, hey, this is a big sticker lab. They bring in a ton of money to the university. It was sort of like, this is a lab that I need to prioritize. This is one that I want to focus on. They also have a lot of graduate students, which really swayed me because I wanted to reach as many graduate students as I could. So that lab was huge. Dr. Bill Lamp's lab, his lab is a little bit different because even though it's just as big as Dr. Dennis's, it was different. His need was different. The need for that lab was different. He had a student who had already completed a systematic review. And so it was more of me just stepping in when I needed to. So it was very much based on need, Megan, if that makes sense. I hope I'm explaining myself well there.
And there is one more question for you, Jody. How do you want to streamline and how do you get consultation? how do you want to streamline how you get consultation requests?
Yeah, so for the labs in particular, that's a really great question because, like I said, they're coming from everywhere. It's either somebody's talking at me or I get an email or something like that. I would really like a form on a LibGuide that all the consultation requests come through, very, very similar to what the systematic review team in the STEM library, or well, I guess it's like across the libraries at the University of Maryland does already. So it's just like a form that says, you know, I understand that you're coming to me from this particular lab. What is it that you want me to talk to you about? Do you want to talk about systematic reviews? Do you want to talk about, you know, research data management? What is it exactly that you're talking about? Because I just think that, like, instead of having them coming through, you know, all over the place, it would just be one place where I'm getting those from. It's less of the, it's like less of the lib chat stuff, Judy, that you do such a marvelous job with, and more of like the individual research consultation requests. Does that make sense?
Well, kind of, but how would you, I mean, if you're in the lab and you're with these students, you wouldn't say to them, go fill out the form. They're going to say right then and there, they want to meet with you. And then you would probably, or would you say, then go fill out the form as opposed to just email me and we'll set up a time?
Yeah, I probably would send them to the form. I'm not gonna lie, because like you know, like when people are talking at me, especially in the lab setting, when there's, you know, say 10 students and they all need something different, it's like, I understand that you know, maybe 3 of you want to meet and I should probably be able to just set it up right there. But if you can like send me a research or a form, if you can send me a request through this consultation form, I feel like I would just not miss anybody and not lose track of people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you, Jody. And we're kind of out of time, so we probably need to move on. And the next speakers are Angel Tang and Dave Bloom, science and engineering librarians from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And they will be talking about Franken Guide and the graduate students.
All right, thank you, Elena, for the introduction. And first up, I have to apologize because I lost my voice. I got it back, but I sound terrible. And now you all have to listen to me for the next several minutes. But yes, thank you so much for attending our lightning talk.
You're doing great, don't worry.
Good. And in our talk, we'll be discussing how the science and engineering librarians at the University of Wisconsin-Madison created a LibGuide of reusable elements to create orientation guides for graduate students when we were not able to attend in-person orientations. For this presentation, we will give an overview of our science and engineering library structure, discuss the situations which made the Franken Guide necessary, and detail the design process and show an example of a customized guide. So the 4 of us involved with this presentation, myself, David Bloom, Barbara Sisolak, and Jessica Newman, we are science and engineering librarians at UW-Madison. And throughout this presentation, we'll use the acronym CEL, which stands for Science and Engineering Libraries. And CEL is composed of 4 campus libraries with 11 liaison librarians and several other library staff. Collectively, we liaise with about 35 departments and research centers across campus. And at CEL, we have an engagement team model, meaning that a small group of librarians work together to support groups of departments. Barbara, Jessica, and I are here on the biosciences team, and Dave is representing PSET. So August of 2020, COVID made fall 2020 planning really uncertain. Many courses, meetings, and other engagements were being shifted virtual, and in-person engagements were being kept very small. We wanted to maintain our fall library orientation engagements. Our departments were happy to have us, but they were mostly planning for the entire orientation program to be virtual in some fashion. We're trying to figure out those logistics. They left it up to us to figure out how to fit into the overall program. And at this point, the librarians were already struggling to keep up with pivoting fall library instruction program, library operations, library event programming, and library services to formats that would work with the campus COVID plans. And orientations have always been an important connection point, so we did not want to forego them, but everyone was pressed for time and had differing levels of experience and comfort in creating virtual objects. So what could we do to relieve the pressure on the librarians while still providing a robust library orientation to our new grad students? And so enter the reusable graduate orientation student guide, which we've termed the Franken Guide. We had already previously made some reusable LibGuide content for ease of making custom guides for courses. And over the summer or fall of 2020, we put together a reusable guide for graduate student orientations. And having this template guide reduced duplicate efforts, created elements that had good visual appeal, and offered a highly customizable standard guide. So here are some examples of elements included in the reusable guide, including a contact box for the bioscience team, a list of links for student services, and COVID-19 information. All the elements contain images for visual appeal, and the text is concise and informational. We wanted to be intentional and consistent in guide layouts, which was made easier with this reusable guide. And now I'll pass things over to Dave to talk about the guide's architecture.
Thanks, Angel. So as Angel mentioned, we had kind of a design idea for the guide. We knew kind of like what an ideal prototype of the guide might look like. So then it became a matter of figuring out strategically, how could we create sort of a reusable version of this guide so that it's customizable, but also some level of standardization existed. So we ended up making use of some quirks of LibGuide's content management functionality that some of you may be completely familiar with, and maybe we're not blowing any minds here. But we basically ended up using a combination of mapping and copying to accomplish what we needed these guides to do for us. So we created what was basically a 3-tier structure. We created a bunch of mappable content boxes that were kept in our local cell toolkit, which is something that we newly designed for this, that included specific graduate orientation material that we were going to use in these guides for those purposes specifically. We're also making heavy use of the general library system LibGuides toolkit, which is something that exists kind of throughout the libraries at the University of Wisconsin. And that's additional content that we could kind of borrow and use in our Franken Guide. The second tier was the copy-ready guide itself, which we dubbed the Franken Guide, since it was composed of a whole bunch of different content. And in turn, that was going to be copied into customizable grad student orientation guides. So I guess we've kind of got like a Franken Guide that's composed of parts, and then I guess kind of like a cloning experiment gone wrong to create the customizable grad student orientations that come out of that. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of how the toolkits work. This is the new toolkit that we created for Cell. We previously had, as mentioned, some toolkits floating around UW. We have a general library system toolkit. We had created some toolkits that were specifically for use in some of our engineering courses, where we'd actually create pages and map the entire pages to some of our LibGuides for engineering classes. But this we created new for to be used throughout the science and engineering libraries. So most of the content for the graduate orientation Franken Guide were coming from individual boxes in this Cell toolkit. So to keep things organized, we split the toolkit into top level pages and subpages. But these aren't meant to function as page layouts at all. These are just containers for individual content boxes that are going to be eventually mapped elsewhere. Some of the content is applicable for a lot of the guides, and not just the graduate orientations that we're primarily focused on at the moment. So we put those in some top level pages, such as contact information, common reused boxes. You can see there are some examples here, like in common reused boxes, we had some COVID-19 information that we knew we were going to be using outside of the graduate orientation guides as well. So we just wanted to make sure we had some general areas that we could cover kind of on this top level. Also on the top level, then we also developed the graduate orientation specific content. We popped that into a page called graduate orientation material. And then we created subpages under that for research support, literature searching, just ways that we could kind of categorize the material that eventually would get mapped out to the Franken Guide and ultimately the specific graduate orientation guides. Again, the subpages aren't mapped in their entirety. They're just containers for content boxes, and that allowed for greater customization later in the process. Like I said, we have in the past used these subpages to map entire pages to reusable pages that can be mapped to guides. But in this case, it's just the content boxes we were concerned with. So next slide. And so this is kind of what it looks like when we mapped out to the Franken Guide itself. You can see there are a bunch of notes on some of these content boxes, because what happened is those boxes actually were created natively within the Franken Guide. So most of the boxes are coming from those from the toolkit, from the subpages in the toolkit. So let me start over here. We created the Franken Guide, a brand new unpublished research guide intended for copying. And our intent here was to establish kind of a basic layout and load it with as much standardized content as we could. But we also wanted to allow for some modification and deletion of content. So most of this content is coming directly from the SEL toolkit or other toolkits available via UW libraries. This stuff stays static, it stays mapped throughout the entire process. But then we also created content boxes original to the Franken Guide that just live on this level, this new guide that we created that was going to serve as a template. So these are intended to be customizable or replaced and are labeled as such. So a lot of the notes that you see here, they're indicating that when a librarian copies this guide, they're supposed to replace or modify the content in some of the boxes. And the next slide gives you kind of an idea of how this architecture works in practice. There's kind of a diagram of how it all works. So to create a new publishable graduate orientation guide, the librarians copy and rename the Franken Guide. And you can see this kind of on the right side of the screen here. You can see that ends up in the published guide. Some of the content is coming from the Franken Guide, and that's mapping directly all the way back to the SEL toolkit. So all of that stays extremely consistent. It is, however, removable if desired. So the toolkit content is mapped to the Franken Guide, but it's also mapped to the published guide. Librarians can delete the content as needed. For instance, a content box mapped from the toolkit that's dedicated to technical standards, for instance, may be relevant for engineering graduate students, but it's not relevant as much for cellular and molecular biology graduate students. So in that case, the librarian copying it could delete it if it's not relevant. The content that's original to the Franken Guide is modifiable and deletable. For instance, different teams tend to use different language to introduce their guides. This allows each team to customize the language or replace a box entirely. And finally, some content boxes original to the Franken Guide are simply placeholders. They instruct the guide creators to delete the box and replace it by mapping specific content boxes from the SEL toolkit. For instance, each team is expected to delete a placeholder contact box and replace it with a mapped team-specific content box from the toolkit. And on the next slide, this just gives you some ideas of how we have some of the content that may be replaceable or modifiable. So in this instance, the first box, it's the welcome content as it exists in and is copied from the Franken Guide. So it's got a little notation there that the note is supposed to be deleted. The text can be updated, you can modify if needed. In one of the customizations, you can see over to the right, the language was changed and the graphics were added. In another customization, the internal note language was simply deleted and the librarians decided to keep the text that was kind of standard for that box. And then another possibility would be to simply delete the box altogether. Some people just don't like welcome boxes on their guides. If they want to, they can delete them. Angel will next show you how some of the customization looks in context.
Thank you, Dave. So here's an example of a LibGuide built from the reusable elements. Jessica Newman from the biosciences team put this together for the bacteriology graduate orientation. And I believe Barb has shared the link to it in case you're interested in taking a look. So as you can see, this is the main page. It features a short narrated video with an introduction to library resources. It includes a contact box for a team as well as a personalized welcome. And it also links to another more general UW-Madison Libraries orientation LibGuide. Next slide, please. Yes. And here's the teaching support page from the same guide. And like I've mentioned, we've shared the link, so please feel free to peruse it and take a look at all the elements and how they've been combined and customized to make this particular guide. So here's some facts and figures about how a reusable guide was implemented. In total, the reusable guide was used for 18 departments orientations and also had some elements used in course and subject guides. The reusable guide was successfully used in 2022 and 2021, and we will continue to use it this coming fall semester. Some of the feedback we received were as follows. One librarian said, Franken Guide is super useful, love it. Some graduate coordinators said that the guide was great and they were really grateful that we shared it. And another librarian said, since so many things move virtually during the pandemic, there are many instances where virtual content is now expected, and this guide gives us flexibility to provide content for anyone who cannot attend an in-person event. So it's great to hear that our Franken Guide was well received. And yeah, thank you for paying attention to our presentation. We're happy to take questions. Dave, I'm going to let you answer any questions so I can stop talking.
So I love Judy's comment. Wow, you all can teach in Spring Share tutorial instead of Spring Share teaching. So I don't see any questions, and I don't see any raised hands. So then I think we're gonna move forward. And Judy Markowitz is next. She's a reference coordinator and subject librarian for several disciplines at the University of Maryland. And she will be talking about reference services post-pandemic.
Hello, everybody. Hold on one sec. Let me make sure you can see my, whoops.
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, hold on. Okay, thank you, Yelena. Man, that really, that LibGuide was amazing. Okay, so I'm Judy Markowitz, and in addition to being a subject liaison, I also coordinate our reference services and co-coordinate our virtual chat services. So for our virtual chat services, my co-coordinator is my staff colleague, James Spring, and he's the manager of our front desk at McKeldin, and we work closely to manage that service. So I need to set the stage a little bit for how we provide reference services. We have 6 libraries on campus. Each has a combined CERC information desk. But I'm going to focus on McKeldin, which is where I am, and that's the main library. And our reference services are a little bit different from our branch libraries and other libraries in that the librarians are scheduled to provide service throughout the day, either on our desk or off our desk. Okay, so in McKeldin, we have this single desk, which is our library services desk. And that is, hold on, I want to try and move this. One second. Okay, and that is covered by staff and students from our user services and resource sharing department. But librarians are on as well, but we provide service at our own desks. So I'm trying to get to the next slide, which is not going. Okay, here we go. All right, so this banner is up here. So reference service is provided by librarians from the McKeldin Humanities and Social Sciences Department, from librarians and graduate assistants from our Teaching and Learning Department, and from our TSL fellows who are graduate students from our iSchool enrolled in our Research and Teaching Fellowship Program. And if you attended yesterday, you heard about this program from my colleague, Lindsay. So the librarians are scheduled for 3 to 4 hours each per week. And the GAs, and when we have the fellows, they're scheduled for 2 hours each per week. So depending on what semester it is and whether or not the fellows are providing reference, we can have anywhere from 10 plus librarians and fellows and GAs providing reference. I don't understand why this isn't going. Okay, so the reference librarians cover 2 services at the same time. We provide chat, which is our virtual reference via SpringShare, and the librarians are the backups. We have 3 people covering chat from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and then till 5 on Fridays. But our total chat hours are from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and then 8 to 8 on Friday. So during that core 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., one of those people is our primary chatter, and that is covered by staff and students from McKeldin and the branch libraries, and occasionally branch librarians will also cover chat. Cindy Frank. We also have one person from ILL and reserves, and then we have one librarian, and it's the librarian who is this backup, so that the primary chatter can just go ahead and transfer a reference question to the librarian so that the patron doesn't have to wait, doesn't have to be told to email, or doesn't have to be told we're going to turn this into a ticket, unless of course we're not available, and then that's what happens. But we also will answer questions that come in if the primary chatter is already chatting. We don't want that primary chatter to stop what they're doing and go answer another question. And so we will go ahead and get that question as well. We also provide on-call in-person service, which means that when somebody comes to the desk and it's a reference question, and remember we have this schedule that we're on, they will call the librarian and we are at our desks waiting to be called down. So and then we meet with patrons behind the desk at dedicated workstation computers. And since we're also on chat, we set ourselves offline when we go downstairs and then back online when we arrive back at our desks. Sometimes we can even instant message the primary chatter to say that we've been called downstairs. If we happen to be in the middle of a chat question and get called downstairs, we just figure out how long we might be. And then when we're finished, we go ahead and go downstairs. So thanks to Brett yesterday, he had pictures of the desks at his place. And I thought, well, gosh, I better do that for us too. So these are pictures after the pandemic and when we reopened. So they look a little different than what they did before the shutdown. But the photo on the left is the same, except we didn't have the plexiglass and we didn't have the two monitors. So this is where we would meet patrons, which is behind our library services desk. We would either sit at the computer and have the patron use their laptop. If they didn't have a laptop or didn't want to, we would have them sit at the computer and then we would direct them. And then we added this third desk, which is around the corner, so that we're kind of, this was for the pandemic, so that we'd be a little bit away from the front desk. So before the pandemic, covering from the 2019 fall semester, the first day of classes through final exams, we were called down to the desk a total of 83 times. And during that time, we teleworked 1 day a week. And this was an important issue when we returned because our teleworking days changed, but that's what we did. So right before the shutdown, spring semester of January 27th through March 20th, we were called downstairs 23 times. So I think we were probably on our way to having the same number, if not more, of being called downstairs. So fall 2021 reopening, we decided that we were going to provide reference in person, even though, of course, during the pandemic, as I'm sure this was the case for all of you, we were able to provide reference very well via virtual chat, using screen share, Zoom, and that kind of thing. But we felt so strongly that if patrons come into the library with a reference question, that we wanted to help them in person. We didn't want to have the front desk folks tell the patrons, well, go ahead and go to another computer or a laptop and sign into chat and you'll get reference help that way. We didn't want them to have to be told, well, here's the email for your subject specialist, go email them with your question. In addition, President Pines of the university had a directive that we needed to show our students that we were back in full strength and be open and ready and welcome them. And that included the libraries and the librarians. So when 2021 came around, in addition to wanting to provide reference in person, we had a request from our library services desk for the librarians to be present down at those consultation desks for the first month. So instead of us being up in our offices and waiting to be called, they wanted us to be downstairs. And the reasons for this, there was this expectation that a large number of students would be coming in person. I mean, we had this class of freshmen who had never sat in set foot inside the building. We had a new set that were coming to campus for the first time. So although we didn't know what the numbers would be like, our expectation was that we would be having a lot of students and patrons coming into the library in person. But this was also a way for us to reintroduce the librarians and the staff and the students, because we hadn't met them in person. We were doing everything via Zoom. There was turnover. And so this was a way to reconnect and get to know one another. Was everyone on board with this? No, we had a couple of dissenters who had a real concern about COVID, but we were following all campus protocols for protecting health and safety. Everyone had to wear a mask. We added the plexiglass in between the computers. There were hand wipes and sanitizers everywhere. We added the double monitors. Vaccinations were required. We added that third desk that was farther away and more private so people could feel safe. And frankly, it really wasn't fair that the librarians would be holed up in their offices while staff and students at the library services desk were required to be there in person. So what we did for that first 4 weeks, we were stationed down there at those consultation desks, but we did this with the understanding that we would monitor it, whether or not we would be needed to be downstairs. And as it turned out, we were not needed. So we ended it early after 2 weeks on Monday, September 13th, instead of going for the full month. And for the rest of the semester, we continued to be on call and cover our chat, but we did it in person, but up in our offices. And I don't know if the issue was that people are not recording all their transactions when they were called downstairs, but they were only about 10 times when we were called downstairs to help someone with a reference question. But that doesn't mean that we weren't answering questions, because remember, we're still on chat. So of our total chats, 2351, the librarians were involved with 694 of them. So it's not that we were not answering questions, it's just that people were asking their questions remotely, even though we assumed that they would be coming in person. So reference services post-pandemic well, for the summer, we are covering chat remotely at home or in the office if you want, but we're not on call in person. We just found that actually statistics for the spring semester dropped in all cases, even the number of people entering the library, the number of chat questions, and certainly the number of times that we've been needing to be called downstairs. And for the fall semester, well, we discussed what we're going to do at the start of every semester, and we will do the same. That includes Yelena and the rest of the HSSL and TLS librarians, and we get input from James, and we try to see what makes the most sense for us to do. And that's it. Question?
So, yeah, I'm looking for questions. I'm sure that people in various organizations are in the exact same position as we are. It seems like our in-person activities drastically changed from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic times. And it's not only with reference, but it's also with in-person instruction as well. Although the online, reference and online instruction are still going really strong. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing that, and as I mentioned about recording, is we're not all, I discovered we're not all on the same page in how we record our transactions. So that's another thing we need to talk about.
Okay, so now we come to our last but not least speaker, Drew Barker. He's performing arts librarian at the University of Maryland, College Park. And he is going to be talking on pivoting towards people and puppets during the pandemic.
Great. And do you see my screen, Yelena?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. It's a large responsibility to follow Dame Judy Markowitz, but I'm going to try my best.
Thank you, Drew. I was going to
Sure.
tell people that there's one more presentation after me, and it's my great colleague, Drew Barker. So hang in there.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, both of you. Yes, so we're going to get started because this is a lightning talk. For some context to begin with, my library is located within the Clary Smith Performing Arts Center. It's located here down the bottom left. Those three white windows there are our library. And on the ground floor there, the two windows in the middle is the gallery. That's where the gallery is located, I'm about to talk about. And there's main doors right next to it, but also if you're coming through the main building, you have to walk through our gallery. So we have a bit of a captive audience, but also a great opportunity. And speaking of opportunity, this is a wonderful building that we are embedded in with the School of Music, the School of Theater, Dance and Performance Studies, and 6 different performing arts venues. And so we wanted to make sure that we were leaning into this opportunity during the pandemic, or actually when we reopened. We were slated to do an exhibit on Edward McDowell. Here's the man himself, a very important figure in American music history. However, not the man of the moment for kind of obvious reasons. In this moment of social upheaval and social justice, we wanted to do something different. So when we reopened in August 2021, we wanted to reopen with our community in mind. And what did that mean? We were guided by these questions. How can we reconnect with our community while acknowledging not only what we missed, but also who we missed? How can we engage our community and give them an opportunity to reflect on 2020 and 2021? And lastly, how can we reimagine our exhibit gallery to address these questions? So with those questions in mind, I also realized upon reflection for this presentation, but also earlier, that I was influenced by design thinking. So I'm going to give a shout out to Rachel Ivy Clark, who wrote this book on design thinking, and I saw her speak. And she, amongst other ways, defines design thinking as something that addresses problems that need a creative solution, that takes a human-centered approach, and consists of empathetic discovery, idea generation, and of course, creation. So for our fall 2021 exhibit, for just that fall semester, we entitled it Remembrance and Resilience, and there were 3 main components: 2 paintings, a blackboard wall with colored chalk, and images of work submitted by performing arts students, faculty, and staff that we may have missed during the time away. And so I solicited work from those entities. But to go back to the 2 paintings that we had, we lost not only our namesake, Michelle Smith, in 2020, but we also lost a giant of University of Maryland arts community, David Driscoll, of the David Driscoll Center. He is an African-American artist, collector, curator, and professor. And so, and also this awesome documentary came out in 2021. If you want to learn more about David Driscoll, he is kind of centered in this documentary and is kind of lionized as a godfather of Black American art. So as a liaison that enjoys robust relationships as an embedded librarian, I took advantage of the theater facilities in late summer of 2021 to paint and install the Blackboard panels with assistance from staff. They helped me order it, and then I painted it, and they helped me install them on the walls. And in that way, I also saved thousands of dollars. You can ask me more about that later. This is what it looks like. When we first opened it up, the question on the Blackboard walls were changed every 2 or 3 weeks. And I decided to use colored chalk because that's more playful and vivacious and matched kind of the colors in the exhibit. We consistently had full panels, full engagement on these questions, which was really exciting to see. And there, of course, is the David Driscoll painting that sat opposite the other painting in the gallery that I'll show you in a moment. Here's a close-up of that painting. It's one of my favorites. It's one of the first paintings that I learned about from David Driscoll. So I was super happy to steal this from the Dean of the Arts and Humanities office for my exhibit. Fun fact. So when you turned left, this is what you saw, the painting of Michelle Smith, which was hanging in our library. We just moved it into the gallery and put in a better frame around it. Tragically, at the end of 2021, we lost Clarice Smith, Michelle's mother, who painted this painting. And so beneath the painting on the floor there was a vigil of flowers when Clarice passed away. So this kind of remembrance memorial all of a sudden did double duty. So continuing, this is only there because I taught myself InDesign because we only had 3 panels in the exhibit. So I said, I'm gonna make them and then I'll send them to be cheaply made. And that's another way I save money. Here is another question later in the semester that we had on the panels and with people in the exhibit for scale. We always enjoyed seeing what the students would put on the panels. Almost always there was also little drawings as well and some always kind of little off the wall answers as well. So if you turned around, you saw the other wall, which exhibited the performing arts work from students, faculty, and staff. And I'm going to zoom in on that. That included digital renderings, real renderings, photos of recitals, digital performances, live performances, screen captures from Zoom, digital technical renderings as well. It was just really exciting to see, and also another splash of color that I'd hoped for, but it really was nice to see. This is MFA Scenic grads creating a set model for The Tempest. I love these kinds of process photos to show the work that is often not seen by performing arts students because of the work and the rehearsal, etc. This is the model that was in a glass case in our exhibit. And it was actually, this adaptation was done by Aaron Posner and Teller of Penn & Teller. It actually opened in Vegas, went somewhere else, and is going to be opening at Roundhouse Theater in Bethesda. So it's got quite the life. So what dialectical change kind of happened here? I don't think it's a stretch to say that before we exhibited collections from our archives. Then we decided to exhibit people from our community, their artwork, their words. And so the synthesis here would be people contributed directly to the collective memory of performing arts in our building and or from our community. And so we pivoted again in January of 2022. This exhibit opened February 1. And so in the fall, I started organizing again. We were asked to do a puppetry exhibit. We don't have many puppets, so we're like, yes, we'll do it, but just give us a little bit of time. And so we hoped for a kind of a joyful contrast with the previous exhibit. Also, before we had usually done our exhibits from August to August, which was May to May, which was a little awkward with the academic year. So we took this opportunity to kind of rethink how we schedule our exhibits. So now we're doing it from August to August, which follows the academic year more. So there you can see the kind of components of the exhibit. And yes, that is a Fraggle because we have a great relationship with the Jim Henson Company because he is an alum. We had Punch and Judy, we had books, we had shadow puppets, we had a little puppetry stage enjoyed by undergrads and small children alike. But we also were kind of painting with a large brush. There was this puppetry festival that was the whole exhibit was meant to complement. So I gave them a whole panel and they were able to post their own stuff on that panel when the festival happened. But I also wanted to contrast the international angle that we did mention a little bit in the exhibit with the local aspect, because we have in the DC metro region at least 4 local puppetry companies. And then we asked one, Alex and Olmsted there, to come and do puppetry performances in our library. And it was magical because Milo the Magnificent, the puppet who learned how to do magic, was wonderful. And so that was a really interesting aspect of this kind of larger initiative, larger reimagining of our exhibit gallery as well. And so in varying degrees, I work with a total of 10 different entities to make these exhibits happen. And they include the following. I won't read them all, but I put them here because it shows the diversity of the different partnerships that we created, some of which were old partners, some of which were very new partners. And so, and without all of these people, this wouldn't have happened. However, because of our library's location and the people within it, we have a wealth of opportunity and people. And so I wanted to use that in this year of reopening for lots of different reasons that hopefully have become evident to you. And so in conclusion, we welcome the opportunity to reimagine how we curate our gallery and how we schedule our exhibits. Those choices created a spirit of innovation that we hope to carry forward as we create future exhibits in our library gallery. Thank you, and I'm wondering what questions that you may have.
Thank you, Drew, very much.
Of course.
There is some chatter in the chat, and from Ranty Junos, rad display. This talk interests me greatly because of my liaison work with our museum studies program here at my institution. Thank you.
I have a question.
Please.
Oh, yeah, go, Cindy.
Hey, Drew.
Hello.
So I'm also struck by especially the chalk exhibit that was so interactive, it's being so ephemeral. Because I'm assuming every time you put up a new question, you erased all of the answers from the last question, yes?
That's correct, but we archive them on Instagram and encourage people to take photos as well on Instagram. So that's where it was kind of saved or captured a bit. And that's kind of the only place where it was captured.
Interesting. I just was at a talk about visual literacy on Instagram. We can chat later.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I would love to. Thank you. I'm also
okay. I was really, what's next after the puppets?
We are actually going to go back to McDowell in the fall of this year. We're going to finally give him the credit that he's due because he was one of the first American composers that really put American composition on the map. But that was over 100 years ago, and so much has happened in this past couple of years that we wanted to maybe give him a little break and give us a break too.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to just draw your attention to some of the links I put in the chat. If you don't know who David Driscoll is, there's a great trailer for the documentary and a great exhibit at the Portland Museum that has some amazing images of him and his artwork and some video of him talking. Please do yourself a favor and know who this amazing artist is. Thank you again.
And there is another question, Elsa.
So this is really awesome work, Drew. When you are thinking of an exhibit, what are your considerations? How do you decide?
Well, it really kind of depends. I've been in this position for only 5 years, and for the 15 previous, since the library opened in 2001, it's normally always been sourced from the Special Collections of Performing Arts, or our Performing Arts Archive. But there has been exceptions before I came in. But I think we're entering a new era of trying to be inspired by our collection and our community at the same time. So it just kind of depends on who approaches us and what we have. We will be partnering with Prince George's County in Maryland here to do kind of a larger remembrance of a performing arts venue from like 50 years ago. There's like a 50th anniversary of the demolition of this thing. I can't remember it all right now, but the point is that it's another community aspect. And so we'll have lots of different things from our archive and from the community in that exhibit. So it kind of depends, but we're open to get pitched to. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? And we can actually talk about other things, not just about Drew's presentation, but maybe if there's something else that's on people's mind, now is an opportunity to speak up. We have a few minutes left. I promised everybody to be done at about 4:15, so we have a little time. Was the Jordan slide talk about instruction yesterday? Yes, it was. Once we sort out our situation with the new website, we'll be posting that to our website. Okay. Well, I just want to thank you all again for Okay, Jordan is giving the link right now into the chat. I just want to thank everybody again for joining us. I know the time is never a good thing, and right now it's right before the big holiday weekend. We had excellent presentations that make us think. I've taken notes. I've taken a lot of mental notes of what we could or should be doing next. And so thank you all very much. Thank you for to the speakers as well for coming forward and being brave enough to talk to your colleagues. It's always challenging and always nerve-wracking. So thank you all very much. And I think on that, we could adjourn and start our weekend. Memorial Day is coming up. So, and I hope everybody has a great weather for it as well. Okay.
Thank you, Elena.